Before we get into this, if you find value in deep, honest breakdowns like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Every interaction helps push this investigation to more people who might notice something the rest of us missed. Now, let's talk about the final moments before the case stopped making sense. These are the moments we can confirm. The moments that were witnessed, the moments that were said out loud, the moments that were taken as fact before anyone realized just how important they would become. Because everything that follows hinges on understanding exactly what was happening right before the timeline breaks apart. At this point, Gus was with familiar people in a familiar setting. Nothing out of the ordinary. No panic, no confusion, no indication of danger. From the outside, everything looked routine, normal, predictable, and that's what makes this part so important. The last confirmed moments show us a steady, stable situation, right before everything changes. These are the last seconds where the story is aligned, where everybody agrees, and where nothing feels suspicious. Yet when you compare these moments to what came next, the shift is so sharp, so sudden, and so unexplainable that it raises the biggest question in the entire case. How does a calm, controlled environment turn into a missing child crisis in such a short window? This is the anchor, the starting point. The moment before, the moment where everything stops making sense. If you're following this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. It helps more people see this case, and honestly, the more eyes on it, the better. Now, this is where everything shifts. After those final confirmed moments, there is a stretch of time that should be simple. It should be straightforward. It should be easy to map out. But instead, it becomes one of the most confusing parts of the entire disappearance. We're talking about a window of time that is short, but incredibly important. A window where something had to happen, because Gus was there one moment and gone the next. But here is what makes this so frustrating. There is no clear event in that time frame. No noise, no struggle, no sighting, no physical disturbance, nothing dramatic recorded by anyone. It's not like a door slamming, or an animal running, or someone shouting. It's quiet, almost too quiet. And yet somehow, within that silence, the situation completely changes. You have a child who was right there, visible, present, accounted for. And then suddenly, he's not. And there's no defining moment to point to and say, this is when it happened. That lack of a pivot point creates a gap. And that gap is where theories grow. It's where suspicion forms. It's where doubt enters the investigation. Because when a timeline has a hole, people start asking what belongs inside it. And this gap, this quiet, empty space, is the part of the case that still makes investigators, locals, and followers of the story stop and say, something about this doesn't add up. This is where the case becomes even harder to understand. When a child goes missing in a remote area, the first assumption is usually simple. They must have walked off, gotten turned around, and kept moving. And because of that, search teams usually pick up something: a footprint, a disturbed patch of ground, a dropped item, a trail of some kind. Even in rough terrain, you expect at least one clue. But in Gus's case, nothing. Not one footprint leading away from the property. Not one disturbance in the dirt. Not one item of clothing. Not even a direction of travel. And remember, this wasn't a small search. This was a massive operation involving experienced teams, aviation support, ground crews, volunteers, dogs. Everything you would expect in a large-scale response. Yet all of that effort led to the same result. No confirmed trace of where the child went. And this is what makes people stop and think. How can an area be searched this thoroughly and still reveal absolutely nothing? It's not like this was dense forest or a crowded location. This was open land, space where movement should be visible, where tracks should be clear, where a person wandering should leave some kind of path behind. The absence of any physical sign is not normal, and that's why so many followers of this case keep returning to this point. Because if a child walked away, The land would have shown it. But it didn't. And that's why this becomes one of the most pressing unanswered questions. Out of everything found in this case, there's really only one physical clue that investigators have mentioned publicly: a single footprint in the red dirt. It's believed to match the boots Gus was wearing, and it was found near the homestead. At first glance, that sounds helpful. Finally, something concrete. But when you look closer, it actually raises more questions than it answers. Because here's the strange part. There was one footprint and nothing else. No follow-up prints, no indication of direction, no signs of movement leading away. Anyone who has ever walked through soft red dirt knows it leaves tracks easily. You take a step, it marks. You take another, it marks again. That's why this single isolated print doesn't sit right with a lot of people following the case. If he walked off, there should be a trail. If he ran, there should be even more markings. Even if he stood in place and turned, the soil should have impressions all around that area. Instead, there is only one. And that's a detail people keep asking about because it doesn't behave like normal tracking evidence. It's more like a snapshot, a moment frozen, with no beginning and no end. And when the only clue in a missing child investigation leads to more uncertainty instead of answers, it naturally fuels even more suspicion, confusion, and frustration. One of the most talked about moments in this case was the massive operation to drain the dam near the homestead. Police removed around 3.2 million litres of water, all to rule out the possibility that Gus somehow ended up there. On paper, that sounds straightforward. Search the water, confirm he's not inside, move on. But when you look at the details, there's a lot more going on. First, police divers had already searched that dam within the first days of the disappearance. These aren't casual swimmers. They're trained professionals who know how to navigate murky, vegetation-filled water. If something was there, they were likely to find it. But draining the entire dam suggested there were doubts. Maybe the visibility during the dive wasn't good enough. Maybe thick underwater vegetation made it difficult. Maybe experts insisted that a second, fully exposed search was necessary to rule it out completely. So the dam was drained. It took hours, heavy machinery, and a coordinated effort involving multiple units. And the result? Nothing. No trace, no clothing, no objects belonging to a child, no disturbance detected at the bottom. This left many people wondering, if he didn't go into the dam, and that dam was one of the closest potential hazards, then where did he go? The dam search didn't provide answers. Instead, it removed one of the biggest possibilities from the list. And when you take a major possibility off the table, it forces the next question. Which direction should investigators look now? And what does eliminating the dam reveal about the timeline? When a child goes missing, the timeline becomes the backbone of the entire investigation. Every minute matters. Every detail becomes a thread that could unravel the truth. But in the case of Gus Lamont, the timeline has something investigators hate: gaps, contradictions, and moments that simply don't make sense. Here's what we know. Gus was last seen around 4:30 p.m, playing near the homestead. It was familiar ground, a place he played every day, a place he knew like the back of his hand. By 5 p.m, his grandmother called out for him, and there was no answer. She looked around the yard, checked the usual hiding spots, then searched a little wider. And by 5:30 p.m, police had already been contacted. On paper, it seems very quick. A tight 60-minute window. But here's the part that investigators quietly questioned. How does a small child disappear completely, within such a short time, without leaving a single trace? Not a footprint, not a dropped toy, not a mark in the dust or the scrub. Nothing. And then there's the second issue. Eyewitness recollections of who was around the property that afternoon. Some people say they saw certain vehicles, others say they didn't. One person mentioned arriving right around dusk, but at that time of year, dusk wasn't until almost 2 hours later. Another said they were inside during the crucial window, but phone metadata suggested they were outside, or at least moving. None of these inconsistencies prove guilt. But they do create something detectives pay close attention to: patterns, overlaps, Moments when someone's version of the story doesn't match the physical evidence. That's when the timeline stops being a record and starts becoming a clue. Timeline inconsistencies don't happen by accident, especially when multiple people recall things differently. Sometimes it's human error, sometimes it's panic, and sometimes it's something else. This is the moment investigators realized they weren't just tracking a missing child. They were tracking a series of mismatched stories that pointed towards something or someone slipping through the cracks. Every high-profile investigation has one thing in common. There's always one person the public quietly circles around. Not officially named, not accused, not even labelled a suspect. But someone whose presence in the story just doesn't sit right. And in the disappearance of little Gus Lamont, that person exists. Police have never released a name. They haven't pointed fingers. They haven't even hinted publicly. But behind the scenes, in conversations between locals, in online discussions, and in hushed voices across the community, one individual keeps being mentioned. Why? Because when the timeline was reconstructed, when phone data was analysed, when statements were compared line by line, this person's story didn't match. Not by a lot, just by enough. A few minutes unaccounted for. A small detail that changed each time they were asked. A moment when they said they were in one location, but digital footprints suggested something else. And here's the part investigators always pay attention to. They were close enough to the property to matter, familiar enough not to raise suspicion, and present at exactly the time Gus vanished. No one is saying this person did anything. But in cases like these, it's rarely the random stranger. It's rarely someone miles away. It's rarely a coincidence. Sometimes the truth sits quietly next to the family. Sometimes it stands in the doorway. Sometimes it helps with the search. Not because they care, but because they want to control the story. Police haven't confirmed anything publicly, but the questions surrounding this individual have become too large to ignore. And the moment detectives noticed the inconsistencies, the moment the timeline bent in a strange direction, that's when this case truly stopped making sense. There's a point in every missing child case when the community faces a question so heavy, so heartbreaking, that everyone avoids saying it out loud. But investigators don't have that luxury, because when a child disappears without a sound, and the land shows no signs of struggle, and the search dogs find nothing, and the terrain gives back zero evidence, police are forced to consider the possibility that hurts the most. Did Gus ever leave the property on his own? It's the question people tiptoe around. The one everyone feels guilty even thinking about. But it's also the one that starts to shape the deeper investigation. Because if a 4-year-old didn't wander off, if he didn't get lost, if he didn't fall, if he didn't walk further than expected, then someone might have taken him. Not a stranger hiding in the scrub. Not someone passing through the outback. Not an outsider, but someone already there. That single question, did he actually disappear the way we were first told, is the moment this case splits into two possible truths. One is heartbreaking. The other is terrifying. And investigators are quietly working to understand which truth fits the evidence. Because if Gus didn't walk away on his own, then someone else walked away with him. Every major breakthrough in a missing child investigation begins with one thing: the timeline. Minute by minute, step by step, account by account. And in Gus's case, detectives keep circling back to the same problem. The timeline doesn't fully make sense. Not enough to accuse anyone. Not enough to point fingers, but enough that certain moments stand out. Here's what investigators are quietly looking at. 1. The 30-minute window. Gus was last seen around 5 p.m. His grandmother called out shortly after. He didn't answer. 30 minutes is both a long time and no time at all. For a child to wander that far, in that terrain, without leaving a single track, it's unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. 2. The missing footprints. This is the detail that keeps investigators awake. There were no small footprints leading away from the homestead. Nothing in the dirt, nothing near the sheds, nothing around the nearby path. Even in the outback, a child leaves a trail. especially a child running, exploring, or walking alone. But there was nothing. 3. The gap between last sight and first search. This is the one detail that matters the most, because if a child wanders off, the first direction they move almost always leaves a trace. Broken grass, shifted dust, drag marks, something. But when the search began, the land looked untouched. It's this gap, the space between when Gus was last seen and when the family noticed he was missing, that refuses to settle neatly into place. It forces detectives to ask, did something happen in that window that wasn't noticed, or wasn't mentioned, or wasn't understood? This isn't accusation. This isn't speculation. This is the reality of investigative work. Because when the land tells one story and the timeline tells another, police have to figure out which one is true. And right now, the timeline is raising more questions than answers. Every major investigation eventually reaches a crossroads, a moment when detectives stop asking what happened and start asking why the story doesn't line up. In the case of little Gus, we've reached that moment. The search teams did their jobs, the helicopters did their jobs, the forensic units did their jobs. Even the land itself did what it always does. It kept its secrets in silence. But now, investigators are quietly confronting the question nobody wants to say out loud. Did something happen here that we weren't told? This isn't about blame. It isn't about pointing fingers. It isn't about creating fear. It's about logic. Because when a 4-year-old disappears, without tracks, without clothing left behind, without objects disturbed, without a direction of travel, without a single confirmed sighting, then investigators are forced to consider every possibility, even the ones that feel uncomfortable. Here's what makes this moment so important. 1. The land has been eliminated. After weeks of searching, air-groundwater dams, scrub fence lines, gullies, machinery areas, all have been cleared. Not because the police think Gus isn't out there, but because they found nothing to suggest he ever walked there. 2. No evidence of an animal attack. In rural cases, this is always investigated. But again, no clothing, no drag marks, no disturbed soil. 3. No sign. He wandered off. Accidentally, normally. A lost child will leave a breadcrumb trail of mistakes. Footprints, imprints, broken branches, items dropped. But in this case, the beginning of the trail never existed. 4. This forces a hard question. And this is the moment the case stops making sense. If Gus didn't walk away, and he wasn't taken by an animal, and he didn't fall into a dam, and he didn't leave a trace, then what actually happened? This is the turning point. The moment when logic pushes investigators in a different direction, toward people, toward statements, toward timelines, toward human behaviour. And this, right here, is the question at the centre of this entire case. If Gus didn't disappear by accident, then someone knows what happened. As we reach the end of this breakdown, one thing becomes painfully clear. Nothing about this case adds up the way it should. A child doesn't disappear without a trace. A search this large doesn't come up empty by coincidence. And a timeline this short doesn't fall apart unless something critical is missing. Somewhere between the last moment Gus was seen and the first moment the search began, there is a truth that has not yet surfaced. And someone out there knows exactly what it is. The land has been searched. The water has been drained. The evidence has been analysed. Now the focus shifts to people, behaviour and contradictions. This case hasn't gone cold. It has reached a point of clarity, the moment where investigators stop looking outward and begin looking inward. If you've listened this far, it means you care about what happened. It means you want answers, and it means you refuse to let this story fade into silence. So please like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what you believe is truly going on here. Your engagement helps keep this case alive, and every voice adds pressure for the truth to come out. We'll continue following every development, every shift in the investigation, and every new detail that brings us closer to understanding what really happened to little Gus. Because this isn't just a story. It's a child, and a child deserves answers.